Shalom Chaverim, I'm Steve Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Very important broadcast today as you're going to discover very serious situation in the book of Naum. And a lot of this has to do, and let me just get the right place here for you here. This is from the Qumran Scrolls. Now, of course, this is this particular part of the book of Naum, chapter 3, is put in a modern script of Hebrew so we can see it a little bit better. But what I actually have highlighted in yellow never made it into our canon. Yeah, believe it or not, you're looking at 4 verses that did not make it into our canon out of the book of Naum. And there may be more. You have to understand that Naum is bits and pieces and fragments as well, but on this one particular part, on chapter 3, we have quite a bit of text there that we don't have in our chapter 3 of the book of Naum, which totally, completely gives you a new perspective of what's really going on. And what caused me to get into this search here was actually from the book Rabbinic Judaism Debunked. And Rabbinic Judaism Debunked also comes from this website right here, oneforisrael.org. They are Israeli believers in Israel that are witnessing to the Orthodox community, trying to win their own people to Christ. The same desire that I have, winning the Jewish people to Christ. And yet at the same time, we know that they're not all going to be able to be won to Christ, because there is certainly a very sinister demonic group in behind the scenes there that is working right through the bloodline of the Nephilim. And so we'll get into that a little bit later as I get into this broadcast here. But they're the publishers of the book there. It is an amazing book. I don't read many books myself, nowhere near as much as my wife does, but there are some books that I just get really interested in, and Rabbinic Judaism Debunked was one of those books there. I read half of it yesterday. I'll finish the other half tonight. And so I really encourage you to, if you're into reading, that's one source you'll want to read there. Now, let me get right into this broadcast here with you, though. This is from page, oh gosh, I don't even remember what page it's from. I think it's like page 20 it's page 15 of their book. And they're quoting from the Qumran Scrolls. The very top portion right here is from the Qumran Scrolls there. And they have all the footnotes in the bottom, which is the way actually the book I'm writing now, I keep all the footnotes on the bottom of the page. So it's easier for those that are researching to follow along where I get my own research from. And kind of blocked out with that enlargement there. But anyway, the meaning behind it was deceivers of Ephraim, which by their lies of teaching, tongue of falsehood, and language of fraud will mislead many. Now, what I've not been able to fully cross-reference as of yet is what they do have in the book already. They have the information down there, but it's very tedious finding all the specific pieces of the puzzle that you need to do. But they know that that particular part of Naum is applying to the Pharisees. As they note here, the leader of the Pharisees is described by the Dead Sea Scrolls as the preacher of deception. Proshim is what they call them in Hebrew, right? And the man of mockery, okay? And also we have, and he is accused of misleading many with his deceitful teachings and even detesting the written Torah. This is not a joke, friends. That's just how serious the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic organizations that are very much into Talmudic beliefs believe today. And even as they back up in their writings here, the ancient historian Yosef ben Mattatyahu, which is Josephus Flavius as we know of him, reinforced this when he wrote that the Pharisees commanded Israel with traditional laws which were never a part of written Torah or written law, therefore were rejected by the Sadducees, who argued in favor of sticking to the text alone. Well, the Sadducees were Karaites then. Let's face it, that's what they were. They were Karaites. Now, you know, Yeshua blasts the Sadducees as well, so don't get me wrong here. but not nowhere nearly as bad as the Pharisees, which, by the way, the Pharisees only numbered about 60,000 at the time of the Second Temple. In fact, the destruction of the Second Temple was what gave them the momentum in which they had need of in order to bring forth their oral law. And the book here actually argues that the oral law never existed until after the Second Temple, the destruction of the Second Temple. That was something that I had not actually seen someone make that stand for before. But anyway, I decided I had to go see, where is this, right? Where is this particular part here? Mata'ai Ifram Ashar Betamod Shachram Veleshon Kazabehem Veshafat Marama Yota'av Rabbaim. Where was this quotation taken from? I was really curious to know. The deceivers of Ephraim, which by their lies of teaching, tongue of falsehood, and language of fraud will mislead many. Where did they get this from? So I went on a search. I saw that they had given the location in the Qumran scrolls where they had found this particular piece from. Now they actually took this, by the way, from a book. It's a Hebrew book where they actually did this introduction to the research in Hebrew by Nitzan B. and Kessler M. Of the Qumran scrolls that were writing about this. And of course, they're the ones that actually, Israeli scholars that are showing that verse there, part of the Naum scroll of Q, I'll actually get to it here for you in just a moment here, part of the Naum scrolls there, and right here we have it here, 4Q 169 is where they got that from. Now they actually take it from starting right here. They did not include the first two words in here. I will translate those for you there, and they quote this lines right here about that. So when I begin to look into this, I realized also that where the 4Q 169 begins is actually on Naum 3:2 begins in our Naum chapter 3 verse 2, and I begin it with verse 3 and there. So I wanted to show you first the Hebrew side, and we're going to read down. We're going to read down from verse 1 in Naum all the way down until we get to verse 4, and then you're going to see where these pieces here are and what actually is said there. And I think it's really going to be fascinating for you. So let me scoot over here to the English version here. Now, I did it the same way in English when I did the translation. And I have to tell you, especially in the case of verse 5. Verse 5 in the Qumran scroll, because I don't have anywhere other scholars have translated it. I'm working diligently to find translations other than my own, but especially this verse 5, and I got it 5-Q for the Qumran text. I have MT for the Masoretic text there. And so what we have in Naum, and I'm not getting all the way down to where we get into Nineveh and things like that, but I'm focusing on mainly our first 4 verses, which would be verse 1, 2, 3. Then we were missing this 2 right here. I call it verse 5 and 6 of the Qumran text. Verse 4 of the Masoretic text, which would be verse 7 in the Qumran text. We do have that one there. And then we're missing verses 8 and 9, which would then precede verses 5 and 6 and so forth inside the Masoretic text there. So I wanted to share with you and just kind of read the whole thing here because it's just really, really fascinating. And I tell you what, I can tell by the camera, it's not that easy for you guys to see. So I'll just have to scroll it up a little bit because I want to make sure you guys can really see what is on here. So in the Masoretic text, we have, "Woe to the bloody city, it is a full of lies and rapine. The prey departeth not." I don't even know what the word rapine means. That's an odd word, right? Anyway, "Hark the whip, hark the rattling of the wheels. Prancing horses and bounding chariots. And it's kind of odd they use the word hark. I know they use the word kol in Hebrew, which is like the voice. So I guess it's kind of like listen, listen, sort of type thing, but it's not the word listen in Hebrew. Anyway, Masoretic text goes on to say, the horseman charging and the flashing sword and the glittering spear and a multitude of slain and a heap of carcasses, and there is no end of the corpses, and they stumble upon their corpses. You can see why it'd be hard to translate anything like this from Hebrew to English. Anyway, just looking at our first three verses in the book of Naum, chapter 3. So then we get into these next two verses, which, as I said, are not even in the Masoretic text. It's not in our own Bible as we read today. Again, it is Qumran scrolls. It is the book of Naum, and scholars have identified it as the book of Naum in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is what he says, though, this is a really hard one for me to translate here, which will not bring the desolation of Gentiles closer, captive and despised, provocation between them and exile, fear of enemy and majority. Kind of like verse 3 of the Masoretic text, right? Very difficult to really understand. But when I got into my next verse here, verse 6 as I call it, of the Qumran scrolls, it was much easier to translate. Carcasses will fall in their days, and there is no end to their profane rule. And even the Gentile in their flesh will stumble upon their guilt. All right, now let me tell you why this is so important. We already know, and I'll share with you again so you can see this. I want you to really understand this from this book right here, Rabbinic Judaism Debunked. These men, these two doctors here, they have taken from the Qumran scrolls, from the book of Naum, and one of the missing verses, which would be right after verse 4 in our particular Masoretic text works, they show you the deceivers of Ephraim, which by their lies of teaching, tongue of falsehood, language of fraud, will mislead many. And according to Hebraic scholars, they know that was implying the leader of the Pharisees, which is described by the Dead Sea Scrolls as a preacher of deception and the man of mockery, and is accused of misleading many with deceitful teachings. The Parshim, the Pharisees. All right? Now, that's written in their book, page 15. All right? Let me make that bigger so I know you guys can see this really well, right? Okay. See? The leader of the Pharisees is described by the Dead Sea Scrolls as the preacher of deception and the man of mockery. And he is accused of misleading many with his deceitful teachings. Now, when you take that into consideration, they show you that one verse that was missing, right? And I'm going to take and show you, that's the Hebrew form. I'm sitting there fixing to read that, thinking you guys can get it. Sorry, didn't mean that. All right. But, see, down here is the one they're talking about here. Because we have verse 4 of the Masoretic text, which is number 7 in the Qumran scrolls. And, guys, bear with me. I know I go through this and keep repeating myself. I do it so that it really sinks in for you guys. Okay? But in verse 6 of the Qumran, chapter 3 of Naum, he says, carcasses will fall in their days, and there is no end to their profane rule. Pharisees, right? And even the Gentiles in their flesh will stumble upon their guilt. What? The Gentiles or the nations are going to stumble at the very guilt of their own sins because of their misleading Now, here's what's interesting, though. This is in verse 4 of the Masoretic text, which is verse 7 of the Qumran Scrolls. And this only proves that Nephilim bloodline, that, as Yeshua called them, a bunch of serpents. Because of the multitude of harlotries of the well-favored harlot, the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her harlotries and families through her witchcrafts. What did God say to Joshua when they were coming into the lands? Don't do after these nations. And he talked about their witchcraft and their sorcery and all that, and how they pass the children through the fire to Molech. And he said, don't do after that. That's how they got the Nephilim here. Right? That's how that happened. Now, all right, it's not just that verse that they showed you, but there's another verse. All right, so let's look at them both. After he goes into that, deceivers of Ephraim. By the way, Ephraim represents Israel. All right? Deceivers of Ephraim, which by their lies of teaching, tongue of falsehood, and language of fraud will mislead many. This is the clincher. They should have put in the book. Their kings are priests. And a people and families living in the cities, they will be decimated with their advice. Do you realize that last part right there, their kings are priests, tells you that exactly who it is. The Hasmonean dynasty is what became the Pharisaic order. The Maccabees, they're the ones that did what? They usurped the lineage of King David. They took King David's place as the king. And then they appointed their own high priest. Their kings are priests. See? And a people and families living in cities, they will be decimated with their advice. Because that oral law that they decided to concoct to go along with it. So they created an oral law. It never come from Moses. If this was Moses, Moses would have to be schizophrenic to write the oral law. That's how junky it is. Messed up in every direction you could possibly imagine. No wonder why they didn't want this in the Masoretic text. I think they'd figure out, you might just figure out who they're talking about. Don't you think so? Their kings are priests. Wait till I do that trail of the serpent. Or the path of the serpent. I'm gonna bring it all the way down for them. I'll show you. Notice also that verse 7 there, which is verse 4 in our Bible, right? See, because of the multitude of the harlotries of the well-favored harlot. That's exactly what they were doing. Remember what it says over in the book of Ezra? They found out that what? The priests and the Levites were chief in that adulterous affairs that were going on. Having all those promiscuities amongst the women of the land, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Jebusites. Remember how God told Abraham, he said the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. That's when it got fulfilled. That's when it got full. That the iniquity of the Amorites is when they began to sleep with the Levitical priesthood, corrupted that race, and I believe the Maccabees are descendants of it. In fact, there's one particular verse I found where they said when they put on his breastplate, he was like a giant. That's a slam dunk right there for you, isn't it? Think about these things. Oh my gosh. Listen, Yana's coming on with me later tonight. As far as I know, I don't want to make any promises there, but I think she will be coming on tonight. So we'll be getting into some more fascinating things to share with you. No doubt we'll probably talk about Trump's new status of, what is he, King of Israel now? What a mess. You know, they're talking about it's going into a civil war in this nation. There's a lot of things I got to talk to you guys about. I just saw, by the way, and let me just show this to you. Over on Netflix, all right? Let me take you to Netflix. I don't know if I can find it or not now, but I was just on there, and there was a part in here where the Chinese, their company they built here in the United States, it's a documentary. This thing is very well worth watching. And there we go, right there. American Factory. Okay? You gotta see this. This is such a powerful film, and the reason I say it's a powerful film is because it shows how China is taking over America. Now, Donald Trump talked about making America great again, right? Now, they show you in the beginning, December 23, 2008. This is when that huge motor facility there, car company, whatever it was, their GM plant there, laid off all of its workers. All right?
Very serious. It's more serious than
and
you can imagine.
When they took and they laid off all these workers there, that factory became desolate for about the next 7 years. And then the Chinese came in and opened up a automotive windshield company there. And the Chinese run this facility. In fact, they first hired in some Americans there to have the big jobs, the big salaries. But the auto workers that used to make $29 an hour, these are the type of people they were hiring back in, but they was only making like $12.40 an hour instead. They're preparing this nation. President Donald Trump, who said he's going to make America great again, which that's actually a slogan these guys use in this film here. Let me move it forward. GM got shut down. It became a desolate factory. And then this Chinese guy comes in who's manufacturing car windows, and they're showing sand going in there right now. And what is he doing? He's manufacturing car windows here in America. Half the employees are Chinese. The other half are Americans. And they're pretty candid in there. They talk about how the Americans are fat, overweight, can't work, can't perform, can't put the product out. And they get quite frank about what they think about American workers. And they try to bring the union in, that gets shut down. They're planning communism in this nation. You're going to find one day you're going to wake up and what Trump did for you is bring communism in. We need to think about it, friends. You need to think about it. They're talking about having a civil war in this nation possibly 14 months from now, right around the election time next year. They're going to do that to keep Trump in power. You watch and wait and see. I'm telling you, it's coming. You need to be ready. Pray up. Be ready to go. This is not going to get better, friends. And everybody out there that loves and supports Trump and thinks he's some kind of great guy, he's just the man the elite of Israel need to bring about it. And don't kid yourself. This is not the Chinese people that are the problem, friends. The Israeli hierarchy, even the Jewish people of Israel have no clue as to what's really going on. But the Israeli hierarchy, they're the ones that built China and made it the multi-billion-dollar industrial complex that it is. It was the Israelis, the elite of the Israelis, that moved all their companies to China because they know the only way they can rule the world is through communism. That's why with the collapse of the czars of Russia, they converted that country in to a communist nation, putting in Jesuits, Stalin and Lenin to run that country. It's coming to the West. It's coming. Don't kid yourself. I'm Steve Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Support the work we're doing. We sure need your help in doing so. We're trying to cover every base we can think of to make sure that you get well informed about what's really going on in this world. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun with Israeli News Live.